My name is Barbara Mulvihill, and today I'm talking with Jim D. Nelson. Today's date is July 3rd, 2018, and we're in the Campbell Room of the Salina Public Library. Mr. Nelson, could you please state your full name?
My name is Jim Davis Nelson.
And what branch of the service were you in?
I was drafted in 1967. I was drafted in the U.S. Army.
The Army.
And I was trained as an infantryman at Fort Bliss, Texas, and then at Fort Polk, Louisiana.
And what is the highest rank you attained?
I attained the rank of Spec 4, which was equivalent to corporal. I was offered buck sergeant, but I turned it down.
What war or conflict did you serve in?
I was in the Vietnam War in 67 and 68.
And you said you were drafted. Could you tell us a little bit more about what happened and how you entered the service?
I entered the service at Boulder, Colorado, where the draft board selected me to be inducted. I was in New York City at the time working for Raymond Loewy, the famous industrial designer. He designed did a lot of the streamlining for Pennsylvania Railroad. He designed the Coca-Cola bottle, designed Skylab. He designed the presidential aircraft colors for JFK, did the Shell Oil sign, was world famous for his industrial design. I was one of his 3 mural painters, and I did Western murals for big department stores, basically May Company out of Chicago, May DNF and Famous Bar. And I was drafted. I was making very good income, and I was drafted. Had a studio on Fifth Avenue right across from the Metropolitan Museum. And I then got my greetings from the President of the United States, Johnson.
You're from here in Kansas.
Yes, I was born in Beloit, Kansas.
And then how had you gotten to how had you made your way into your career as an artist?
Well, I plowed for my grandmother. After my grandfather died, I would do the plowing and field work starting at 14. Also worked for, did some field work for my aunt and her husband, Clinford and Mary Culp, up in Jewell County. And I always liked coming to Kansas in the summertime. And but my parents took me to New York, and I saw the Rembrandt paintings in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and that's when I decided I wanted to be a painter.
Did you have any formal training?
No, I had training only when I got to New York after high school. I left Kansas when I was 17 by myself on train and went to New York, and didn't have any money really, and but got a scholarship at an art school, and then I got a Ford Foundation grant at the art school, so that paid me for the classes and my supplies. So I went to the Art Students League and also the National Academy of Design up on 82nd Street.
So that must have been pretty much of a shock when you got your draft notice.
Yes, because I had about $8,000 worth of commissions to do down in Texas and in Denver, another store in Denver, May DNF, and so I belonged to a very difficult union to get into, which was the United Scenic Artists Union, that did all the backstage work for Broadway and TV, and they also did Epcot Center. And so you had to be selected to be in that union because of the quality of your work. You just didn't get to join a union like most unions. You had to be qualified to be in the union. And so when I got drafted, I decided I didn't want to go to where the Eastern Establishment soldiers were going, down to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. So I applied for transfer to somewhere where Kansans and Oklahomans and Texans went to, and that was Fort Bliss, Texas. So that's how I ended up at Fort Bliss, Texas.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And then you went through basic training there?
Yeah, very, very rigorous training there. Only half of our training personnel, 120 soldiers, were able to make it through physically and mental. We had 3 attempted suicides, and we were investigated by the Inspector General for the severity of our training. But I think it really was an idea they had that they wanted us to go through Marine Corps type training.
Oh, okay.
Because it was a wartime situation.
Yes, yeah. So they wanted.
And then at Fort Polk, that was supposed to be even worse, but that turned out to be a piece of cake compared to boot camp. Yeah.
So, do you think the suicides in your unit were because the
attempted suicides?
Attempted suicides were because it was so tough.
I think it was that, and a lot of soldiers were not expecting the type of training that. But like I said, I was able to get through it, and most everybody else got through it. But I would say that it was an unusual situation. Like I said, it was probably more Marine Corps type training than traditional Army training, because my father was in World War II, and he said that he didn't have to go through anything like that. Yeah.
All right, and so you ended up at Fort Polk, and where did you go from there?
Well, I got 30 days leave after Fort Polk, and so I went back to New York City to say goodbye to friends, and I didn't expect to come back. We were told we were not coming back alive. We realized our drill instructors and the sergeants that were taking us out on patrols in the swamps, they were telling us what it was really like and what was our chances. So we didn't really know as trainees until we got to Fort Polk and into the training there, the severity of the situation. Yeah.
And then after your leave, what happened?
Well, I went back to Denver to say goodbye to my folks, my brother, and I got on a plane and went to Oakland, California, and was ready to be shipped by airplane. Flying Tigers was the name of the company that flew us over to Southeast Asia. But we had to stop in Osaka, Japan, because we had to get around a typhoon. And then on the way down, I saw Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal from the air, 30,000 feet. And then we landed at Cameron Bay, and I was supposed to go to 4th Infantry Division, but the last moment they transferred me to 3 Corps, which is north of Saigon. That would be the 25th Infantry Division. Mm-hmm.
And what did you do there?
Well, we had a few days of in-country training at the base camp. The mortars were coming in at night, so that was kind of a new experience, to say the least, because a mortar sounds pretty loud far away, and later you realize you didn't have to go into a bunker or anything if a mortar was hitting far away. But to the new soldiers, it was kind of like an education beginning of an education of recognizing rounds, what they sounded like, and how far away they were coming, and this and that. Well, so then I got my orders to go to the mechanized infantry at Dao Tang next to the Michelin rubber plantation, way up near the Cambodian border. That's where I started serving as what I was trained to do as a rifleman and a machine gunner. And I immediately um, took in all the sights that I could, because not only do you fly into this remote area, but you're experiencing the tremendous heat, and you're not sure what's going to happen to you. But then as soon as you get to your unit, you start to realize that you're with a lot of soldiers that are in the same situation you're in, but they're much more experienced than you are. So you're fortunate if you get into a platoon that has a good sergeant, like I did, Sergeant K, who had been a Korean War veteran, and he had an uncanny sense of where the enemy was out in the jungle. He saved our lives many times.
In your role as a rifleman and a machine gunist, how did you function with your unit?
I did what Sergeant K told me to do. He was very severe. There was no drugs or anything like that, like the movies and TV demean the American soldier in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
The reason for I'm saying that is because one soldier depended on another soldier to be awake and be conscious and be on a full alert. And so you were sometimes you didn't have sleep for days and nights, because you were attuned to trying to stay alert to stay alive. I mean, at nighttime we went on ambush patrols. We went on which was called listening posts, which you took a radio with two other soldiers, and you were way out there in the jungle, way ahead of everybody, and you listened. You were lying down behind a log all night long, and you were listening for the enemy's footsteps. And there was that was scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Is that pretty much what you did within your unit? Is go on out ahead of the other?
We moved during the daytime, and we weren't allowed to ride the mechanized tracks, which we called M113s or tracks, and they were armored vehicle that had tracks and a 50 caliber machine gun on top. But platoon sergeant wanted us to walk 20 meters to either side of the track to protect it, and we were very worried about rocket propelled grenades, because they could penetrate the track, the armor. So if we were over to the side all the time walking, we were sort of the first line of defense. And in the thick jungle, sometimes you couldn't see the person ahead of you, but he still wanted you to the side to try to protect the vehicles. We had 20 armored personnel carriers in our company, and we went through the Tricanopy jungle in column, that is in line. So the first track was the track that might get hit, but the enemy couldn't form a ambush too easy, because we went through the jungle and we didn't go down the roads. So we stayed in the jungles, and that was called pushing jungle. And that was because Captain Allison and Sergeant K were aware that they knew what to do, and they were very good officers.
how often did you encounter the enemy?
We encountered the enemy almost every day, whether it be a landmine that goes off, or a mine in a tree that goes off, or an outright firefight. But our purpose was to locate and destroy enemy base camps, way in the deep jungles like the Iron Triangle, and the northern part of the Iron Triangle was called the Trapezoid, and that's where we had a big engagement the last 6 days. And we finally, with the help of Air Force and artillery, we overran that enemy base camp, and that base camp was occupied by the 101st NVA unit, part of the 9th NVA division, and that turned out to be one of the biggest tunnel complexes that had ever been discovered. We never did find the extent of all the underground bunkers, but by the time the battle was over, the jungle looked like a World War I battlefield with no tree standing, just little toothpick-sized pieces of wood and bomb craters. And of course, I was, since I'd been a commercial artist, you might say, in New York, I was asked to do maps on the back of envelopes that were sent to headquarters. And because of those envelope maps that I made while I was in the jungle after we overran these enemy base camps, whether they were occupied or not, I was approached by an officer one day saying, "Are you the person drawing these maps?" And I said, well, I didn't know anybody knew about these little drawings I'm doing. And the officer, he was a major, and he said, yes, they've been helping us at headquarters quite a bit. And he said, did you know there's an opening at 3rd Brigade headquarters for a draftsman? And I said, what's a draftsman? They said, well, he said that you draw maps, you do the drawings on the plastic sheets, which are called overlays, and then those maps that you make on the overlays are taken to headquarters at other divisions and other brigades, so they put those transparent markings over their map, and that shows you where every unit is. Plus, you had to, I found out later, you had to post the colonel's map every night, and also the map at the underground headquarters bunker, which showed where every ambush patrol was, where every battalion was located, and where their ambush patrols were. So you had to know what the grid coordinates were. And I was selected to be the new brigade draftsman, and I did all the maps for the Tet Offensive. And probably the most important drawing I've ever done in my life was the day that I had to do an overlay and show where 15,000 infantry were going to be landed by helicopter in a jungle clearing. And if I had misdrawn those marks, I could have got people killed. So to this day, although I've sold a lot of paintings and I've had a lot of success, I still think that was the most important drawing I've ever done, and will probably ever do.
Yeah, it sounds
Yeah.
like it sure was.
Mm-hmm.
Before we go on and talk about your experiences as a draftsman when you were still out in the jungle, I was just wondering what kind of a casualty rate your unit experienced.
Well, in the Trapezoid battle, we lost half of our company, wounded or killed. We had 5 killed.
And how many people were in your company?
Probably about 100. Yeah. So a lot of people, half were wounded, and the battle lasted 6 days. And we assaulted the enemy base camp. We got within 100 feet of the enemy trench line, and they were there, and they had tunneled into the termite nests that stood above the ground maybe 4 or 5 feet. And so they shot at us from those termite nests too, with RPG rounds. Yeah.
You said you were a part of Operation Atlanta.
Yeah,
Is that what that was?
That was part of Operation Atlanta.
Okay.
Yeah, included Thanksgiving, 1967. Yeah.
And what time period was it when you transferred to the draftsman position?
It was latter part of December.
Of 67?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So I'd served in the front lines for 3.5 months, and then I served at brigade headquarters, and I had several friends come down to visit me when they came back from their operations, and I tried to get them jobs in the base camp. I tried to help my friends out to get out of the jungle, because the strangest thing was I thought people would be embittered that I ended up at headquarters. That wasn't the case at all. When I was told to go to headquarters by the company sergeant, Sergeant Winkler, people shook my hands.
Really?
Yeah. There was no animosity at all. A few of them came down to visit me, and then I wanted them to try to get into a fire brigade at the base camp, if there was an opening. I gave them tips on how to try to get to the base camp, because it was a world that was like night and day. Base camp, you had 3 meals a day.
Yeah.
You had bunker guard duty at night, of course, but basically out in the jungle, you were lucky to have 1 meal a day. We were on the move all the time. We never had breakfast. We had to eat sea rations all the time, and so that's sort of a humorous story in itself. The ham and eggs. I mean, not the ham and eggs. The lima bean, the B1A, or was it the B3? But it was awful. It was ham and lima beans.
Odd combination.
You can imagine that. And they're not heated. They're cold, but you'd take a little piece of C4 and you could heat up the can,
Uh-huh.
You got the C4 out of one of the anti-personnel mines, Claymore mines. They would somehow, you could share a little piece of C4 and light it with a match or something, and it would burn real hot. And that's the way you made your hot chocolate or coffee. And some of the soldiers made pizza out of some of the sea ration bread and Tabasco sauce, and they were quite innovative,
Yeah.
So,
because you had to be.
Yeah, we only got once. Chinook would bring in a hot meal in the evening, but during the monsoon, everything was wet, rained, and the mud was everywhere, and we didn't get back to base camp for 35 or 40 days, so the socks just rotted off of you, and your clothes were just disintegrating because of the mold and the weather, just you're soaking wet all the time. Yeah, that sort of gives you an idea. Not only that, but then the stress of the fear that the enemy was watching you all the time, which they were, and so they knew the terrain, and but they didn't like our 50 caliber machine guns. We dug in a lot. Sergeant K made us dig in a lot. We dug in the mud and we dug into water. And he made us dig foxholes in the water, and then he wanted us to be chest high with foxholes all the time. And Constantina we were working all the time digging in. Now I think that's why some of the other units got hit, because they didn't go into a defensive posture. Their company commanders weren't as strict as the ones I experienced. So I think that the enemy would not attack a better defended position. They would attack a unit that had not taken the time to dig in the evening. That is, you know. Mm-hmm.
After you transferred to your draftsman position, um, could you tell us a little more about that? And was that during the Tet offensive?
Yes, it was before the Tet offensive.
Before the Tet
offensive. Our Colonel Dames, was assigned by Westmoreland to be in charge of the counteroffensive, which the American Army in the III Corps executed against the enemy during the Tet offensive and after the Tet offensive. So my maps were crucial because they went to other units. And so Dames, it was called area of operation, and the maps showed quite a significant large area, and there were other units in that area. So all the maps showed where other units were. So that's how there was coordination, was through the overlays and the maps.
And where was your headquarters?
Dow Tang. It was the old Michelin rubber plantation headquarters. The French had been there. The French 4 Legion had been there. I don't remember the name of the unit, but I was, you might say, privy to be in an area where the French 4 Legion had served. On our patrols, sometimes we saw old trench lines that had been eroded, where there had been previous conflicts and fighting going on. So there was a lot of interest in my mind that we were sort of in a rather interesting area, because the Michelin rubber plantation was miles and miles of rubber trees. And when you got in the rubber trees, it was like in tunnels. The light did not show through the canopy, and water would be dripping off the leaves all the time. But the scariest thing was at night with the tarantulas and their big webs. And we'd go through, and they never bit anybody that I know of. But I often wondered what those big spiders were. But they were humongous, and the webs were like 12, 14 feet in width. And we would have to walk through those spider webs at night, especially with no moon. You couldn't see where they were. And you knew there was a big spider up there in the corner of the web. But nobody ever got bit. But I saw those spiders, and they were scary. Now, I didn't know they were tarantulas at the time, but I saw in recent years, I looked it up on the internet, and those Vietnamese, they kill those spiders, and they eat them as a delicacy. Now, I thought that's not fair to those poor tarantulas. They didn't bite anybody. They were probably catching maybe small insects or big insects and small birds, you know. But I would say the leg expansion was a good foot.
Wow.
That's how big they were. The leg diameter was on them. Yeah. That doesn't include the red ants. The red ants were they stung you like wasp, and their nests were in leaves. And if a track antenna hit one of those trees with a red ant nest in it, then the red ants came down on everybody, and you would never see people stripped off all their clothing so fast in all your life because of the red ants. Mm-hmm. And there were snakes too.
Snakes.
Yeah.
Gosh.
And then the creepiest thing was the leeches, and they lived underground, and they were like big Oh, they were like big night crawlers, and they'd make a creaking sound when you were trying to sleep on the ground. Like if you had your poncho down and you had your head down, and there'd be this creeping noise. Well, those were leeches trying to get to you. And you know what a leech does.
Yes, sure do.
So those are a few stories.
Yeah, doesn't
So
sound
I
great.
do suffer from arachnophobia now.
Oh, I bet. I bet.
Fear of spiders, yes.
Uh-huh. I can imagine.
Definitely.
Now, when you were making your maps as a draftsman, how did you get the information to make?
Well, I was given a pattern or a information that certain grid coordinates were going to be where Charlie Company 3rd to 22nd leg unit was going to be camped overnight.
Okay.
And so I'd look up I'd look on the map, and then I'd see everything was in 1,000-meter squares. And then that's where your grid coordinates were, at the top and the bottom and the side of the maps. And then you would make those locations known, and then you had to put draw a flag with an X on it, which meant infantry. And if it was mechanized infantry, it was a flag with an X on it with a circle, track circle, sort of an oval circle in the center. And that meant, and then you put in front of the flag, you put the company unit A, B, C, or D. And then at the bottom, you would put the battalion, like 3rd or 22nd Infantry. And so you would mark every flag that you drew on the coordinate that was given to you to put on the maps. Mm-hmm. That had to be done every day.
And let's see, how long were you in that position?
I was there for General Gleason saw one of my paintings. See, I captured my own watercolors in one of these battles. Went down in a tunnel, and there was a shaft of light coming from the roof. And in this room were 7 boxes of praying watercolors and a roll of white paper. And that was their, I guess it would be called propaganda room. Because when we went through some little villages like App 3 or App 4, there'd be a banner, with in between trees, and it might say, with broken English. They were so poor at drawing these propaganda signs. It would say, U.S. imperialist girlfriend home Cadillac, go home, U.S. soldier, and then it'd be some Vietnamese word. And we couldn't make heads or tails what they were trying to say.
They were putting everything but the contingency.
Yeah, they would have broken English pieces of paper, and of course I found this roll of big paper, that's butcher paper like, and then these watercolors were used for these signs. Well, I put all these watercolors in my pocket. I didn't take the paper. So I used those watercolor sets to do my drawings when I got to headquarters. And General Gleason saw one of my paintings and recommended me for combat artist at the 25th Division headquarters, which was part of the Pentagon 18th Military Historical Detachment. And what that unit did, there was only one major and one secretary, male secretary, and they would do after-action reports every day on what happened with the whole division, 25,000 troops. They would make a synopsis, write up a synopsis every day. It was called an after-action report, whether there was a battle or whether there wasn't. Well, they used the paintings for to help communicate or show what had happened. So but my Sergeant Major, Pendleton, who was in the Korean War, he wouldn't let me go. So I had to do my drawings and take them down to Cu Chi by Caribou, which was about 120 miles flight. and I'd get to take the day off and get down there and give my drawings to Major Baum, and he was from the Pentagon, and then they put my work in some of their publicity books. And then I extended 2 months, so I was over there 14 months total, and I extended to go to Coochie and be a part of that in person.
Okay, so you spent 2 months there.
Yeah, 2 months there. Mm-hmm. Coochie was a big base camp. That was division headquarters. And that was like going from, some rural Kansas town to Kansas City. It was that much of a change. You can imagine you could get food and things that were, instead of eating instant scrambled eggs, you were eating, they actually had ice cream there. Yeah. I didn't have a hamburger and a malt for 10 months.
Yes.
But when I got down to Tonsanute Air Force Base, I drove the command track, and my friend who was riding shotgun, we pulled right up in front of the Air Force mess hall, and we were surrounded by Air Force guys who never been outside the wire, and they wanted to know whether I had an AK-47 for sale.
Oh.
So went in there and had a malt and a hamburger. And that was after 10 months. You have no idea how good that tasted.
I can imagine. Oh,
even though it was probably water buffalo.
Yes. Well, can you tell us about your worst day in Vietnam?
Well, I think the worst day was when there were several days, of course. They were when friends got killed. Yeah, I had, especially like David Ditch, who I tried to help. He came down to visit me. He had a premonition he was going to get killed. And I told him that, well, go over to the fire department at the base camp and see if there's an opening there for you. Because, see, there are people derousing, leaving. Right. They've done their 12 months, and then there's got to be a position filled. And if you were lucky enough, like I was lucky, same thing happened to my father in World War II. He knew how to speak French and write French, so he ended up being a censor. And he was designated to be in the Normandy landings, and he was trained as a forward observer. His life expectancy was zilch. But my father lucked out in that way, and he was at Fort Polk 25 years to the day I was at Fort Polk, and he was drafted. Sort of a strange coincidence, isn't it? Of all the places and how many years had passed, and I sort of followed in his footsteps just by coincidence. I had no pull. I didn't know anybody special, but yet I became brigade draftsman, picked out of 5,000 infantrymen, So, but I go to the reunions, and we're just like brothers. We just have a great time, And the bad memories are lost. I guess most veterans really compartmentalize things like that. I think that's human nature. But basically, when I lost a friend, that was my worst days, And I was with one that got John Gibson. He was 18 years old. I was 23. I was an old man compared to the other soldiers I served with. My squad leader, Jim Frost, he was 19 years old. And we're still very good friends. Um, but John Gibson, he got a Dear John letter. One of my paintings depicts this subject in my book, your Vietnam War paintings, narratives by participants. And I spent $11,000 having this book published myself because the publisher said he'd be able to sell it in 6 months, all 2,000 copies. But turned out the Army PXs didn't want my book because of politics. During the Clinton years, everything was supposed to be forgotten about Vietnam. So my wife and I, we had a lot of art shows back east, and I'm in like 14 military museums permanently, and I've been able to have my work in a lot of publications, including a recent one by the VFW, Brutal Battles of Vietnam War, and I'm the only painting in it. So that was quite an honor. But see, John Gibson, he got a Dear John letter day before he was killed, and he came over to me in the foxhole. We were both in foxholes, and he said, just got a Dear John letter. I said, well, a lot of guys get Dear John letters. I said, what do you need? He said, well, I want to change my $10,000 life insurance policy to my parents. I don't want my wife to get it. And so what do I do? And I said, well, go back and talk to Captain Allison back in the middle of the jungle clearing there where he was. And he came back, and I said, John, what did he say? He said, well, I have to write a letter, and when we get back to base camp, I got to fill out a form. Well, he was killed the next day, so his wife, who had abandoned him, got the money. But here, 2 months ago, I got a call from Captain Bill Allison down in Montgomery, Alabama. He said, Jim, do you have a photograph of John Gibson? I said, well, why? He says, because there's a Marine in northern Missouri, and he said that John's name has never been put on the county memorial in his hometown. And he found out about himself. And he said also, John has a 50-year-old daughter that's never had a picture of her father. I said, you're kidding me. When John got killed, his wife was expecting, and he has a 50-year-old daughter? And he said, that's right. He said, maybe you could call up this number and help him out. And I said, well, I think I got a photograph. Well, I called up Bill, that's his name, in northern Missouri, and he explained the situation. He hadn't been able to find the daughter. He didn't know where the daughter lived, but they told him at the courthouse she lived somewhere in Missouri. So I looked for the slide I had, and I couldn't find it. And I called him back and I said, I've looked for this slide and I don't know where it is. Well, I came in from the field one day. I was farming, doing something, disking or something, and I saw this slide on the edge of my dining room table. And I looked at it, and it was the picture I was looking for. So I came down here, Salina, had a nice conversion out there at the mall, and had it converted to a photograph, and then I sent it off to them, and she finally got a picture of her father, a wonderful picture of her. And so evidently there's going to be some sort of ceremony down the road at his high school in his hometown, and I think I'll make the trip. Absolutely. Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Well, now if you could tell us about your best day in Vietnam.
The best day? Well, that was leaving.
Leaving, of course.
Yeah. And then the second best day was having that hamburger and malt at Tonsanute Air Force Base. But no, when you got to leave, that was like getting out of prison. That's the only comparison I can think of.
How did you leave Vietnam and come home?
I went to headquarters. Of course, I was there, so I checked in some of my equipment, and then I got down to Camp Alpha at Long Bend, and that's where I turned in my rifle and flak jacket and helmet, and we were given um, uh, khaki outfit, and that's we came back to the States in a khaki uniform and landed at Oakland. It was like a 13-hour trip, and um, the stewardesses were really nice gals, and they were cheerful, and it was really wonderful just to see an American gal again, and and they were really they were asked you a lot of questions and stuff, and they'd serve you, food, and they had a movie, of course, and everything was just really a lot of fun coming back. It was a big relief. But in retrospect, I don't regret serving at all. I'd do it all over again. But I was tired, and also I was not well. And as soon as I got to Oakland, I had to check into the Naval Hospital because I had bad trench foot on my feet, and they couldn't seem to cure it. And I stayed 2 weeks in the VA hospital out by Golden Gate Bridge, and they put something on my legs, and it just took the hide right off of me. Took 2 weeks to heal, and of course I got to meet some of the other soldiers there that were wounded. And the worst situation was the guys that had malaria and couldn't get over the malaria, and they had a whole ward of soldiers that had malaria. So I rode the train back to Denver, and then I went to the Denver Skin Clinic, and they had called in a doctor who had been in World War II in the South Pacific, and he knew exactly what to do. And he had some powder he put on me, and I started feeling better right away. And he said, "Nelson," he said, "you're lucky." I said, "Why?" He says, "Because this has got in your blood. If you hadn't come to us, you would have died from it. But it got into my blood." And I was losing weight, I was really emaciated. But it was because of that bacterial infection that was getting in my blood. And so I started feeling really good in 2 weeks, and so then I bought a ticket uh, to Europe. Flew over to Europe, spent 6 months in Europe, traveling around. Ended up in Spain down there, yeah, where it's warmer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm glad I did that. But I spent all my money, and then I got back to New York on a freighter from Lisbon, Portugal, and I decided I wasn't going to stay in New York anymore. All my friends had gone away, and they didn't like Vietnam veterans there at all. That was the hotbed of the Jane Fonda movement and all that. You didn't mention you were in Vietnam back in New York. Matter of fact, you didn't want to mention it here in Kansas, too. The Osborne VFW wouldn't even let a Vietnam veteran join. I'm not making that up. That's true. So I decided to come back here and start life all over again. I got to Beloit with 50 cents in my pocket. I went up to my aunt's house, walked up there. My brother's old car was sitting out behind the garage, and I got a battery for it and drove out to the farm. All the pipes were broken, but it was sure glad. It was like home. A
Is
lot of
that
good.
where you still live now?
Yeah, still there. I'm fifth generation there. But it people were not sympathetic here, they'd been brainwashed by the media, which was anti-American soldier served in Vietnam, and that didn't change until the Persian Gulf War, where the soldiers were treated to a parade when they came back. Then I think the American public started to relate to the Vietnam veteran in relation to the Gulf War veteran, and why was it the Vietnam veteran was demonized by the media and the movies and just we were portrayed as drug addicts. And matter of fact, that was the rumor at Jewel. When I came back, I was a Vietnam veteran on drugs. Yeah, people said that. I found that out from a friend of mine. But and then I couldn't win. I ran for office. I couldn't win as a veteran. In '76, I ran for state legislature, and I wanted lower taxes, but they didn't want to elect a Vietnam veteran.
That must have been very difficult to.
It was a big disappointment for me.
Yeah.
I was disappointed, and but that's when the road divided, and I took the road on more paintings.
Yes.
Otherwise, I would have been in politics.
Well, tell us about your Vietnam paintings. Obviously, you must have painted a lot of what you remembered from Vietnam.
Well, it is not therapeutic what I do. It's totally historical. I try to chronicle the war, and from my own vantage point. That was multiple vantage points: front line, worm's eye view, and then headquarters. I had a unique experience in that way, and so it wasn't until about 1996 I went to a reunion of a sister battalion. Me and my wife went to a reunion in St. Louis, Missouri, and a young fellow, he was in his 50s, probably like I was, and he was writing a book on fire support base gold, and his company was overrun. He was one of the few survivors in the company, so his life had stopped there. So he's writing this book, and he's going to great lengths to get photographs from everybody and calling up families of those who were killed or wounded, and visiting survivors and fellow comrade in arms. And he's writing this book, and he says, could you paint me a picture of the battle? I said, yeah, that'd be great. I said, I love doing historical paintings, So I worked on this painting 6 months. It's now located at the Department of Veterans Affairs in Albany, New York, in their gallery. It's purchased by the state of New York, and it's a mural 12 feet by 6 feet, has 64 figures in it, and it's got published recently by the VFW in their new book, Brutal Battles of Vietnam. They actually featured my painting, and that was one of the first paintings I did, and it became so well known, the painting, that the military museum at Branson, Missouri wanted to show it and have a reproduction of it. The original painting's up in New York, Albany, New York, but I did some reproductions for the Branson Museum, and from there other military museums wanted my work. So I have a painting like in the Infantry Museum at Fort Benning, Georgia, the new museum there, and we had to take that to Fort Riley, and they put the painting in a connex and shipped it down there themselves, And so I've actually made a little niche in military painting. I'm not, famous or anything like that, but I have made a mark with my work, which I feel in my own lifetime is an accomplishment. And then I just got a commission from a Vietnam veteran in Los Angeles. He wants me to paint a picture for him of himself. And I get commissions all over. These veterans are calling me up or writing me, and they want a painting, and I do it. Because I was there, I want to honor them for their service. I want to do it in a realistic style, which I was trained. In New York, I didn't train into non-objective painting, which was a rip-off to the art investor. And so my idea was to try to study classical realism. So my paintings are basically I try to paint in the Dutch school, like Rembrandt, but I can do a lot of other color schemes. I have a lighter color scheme, but my drawing has improved a lot over the years. So, I think I'm producing a good product, and I'm trying to do the best I can to make it accurate, and to show the way it really was. And if I can show it the way it really was, then I feel that the painting is a success. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you would like to add about your Vietnam-related experiences?
Well, I would like to say that in conclusion, I guess, if this is the conclusion of the interview, the best people I ever knew, the nurses and the soldiers that I knew in Vietnam, were the best people I ever met in my life. I've met a lot of people since Vietnam, but I realized a number of decades later that, I was looking at meeting people and served with people that answered the call. They were the true patriots. And I feel sorry they were so mistreated over the decades. But I blame the media for that.
Well, you must feel fortunate to have served with them.
Yes, it is a good feeling that I did do the best I could, and I tried to do the best I could, and I'm still trying to do the best I can with my paintings on that subject matter.
Well, I guess we will conclude the interview, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Well, likewise. Thank you.
And I do want to thank you for your service, both in Vietnam and in documenting and honoring the people.
And I appreciate the Salina Public Library for having a show of my work here a few months ago.
Show.
We had a large turnout.
We did. It was wonderful.
I heard people came in, since it was here a month, I heard there were quite a few people came in to see it.
It drew a lot of people, a lot of interest, and I think everyone appreciated your painting.
I only regret that my wife wasn't with me, but she passed away 4 years ago. And she was one of my big cheerleaders. I feel a lot of it I owe to her, Sharon.